Today on the deep dive, we are looking at the radical future of corporate strategy and human resources. And to do that, we really have to start with a mental image if you want to understand how crazy business norms can be. Just imagine looking back at doctors smoking in hospital rooms in the 1950s. Right, yeah, just standing right there in the room with a patient, ashes falling on the floor. Exactly, you picture a physician lighting up a cigarette, taking a drag while casually checking a patient's chart, and nobody blink an eye. It was completely normal then. But looking back at it today, it feels, well, it's utterly ridiculous. It is the definition of absurd. Oh, absolutely. And our mission today is to find the modern equivalent of that. We are hunting for the smoking in the hospital practices of the corporate world. To do that, we've got our hands on a really fascinating stack of sources for you. We're talking workshop notes, transcript excerpts, and facilitator guides from an incredibly exclusive HR leadership summit. Yeah, and to clarify, this wasn't just your standard run-of-the-mill networking event where people are just swapping business cards over stale coffee. This entire workshop was facilitated by Cindy Liu, the founder of CHRO mastermind groups, and the room was filled entirely with members of her CHRO mastermind. So you are looking at insights from elite chief human resources officers, people who are steering the ships at massive organizations. And Cindy Liu built this entire summit around this one radical thought experiment. She called it Make It Absurd. It's just such a brilliant framing. She didn't put these senior leaders in a room and ask for incremental improvements. No, not at all. She didn't ask, how do we make our clunky onboarding process 10% more efficient? She went way bigger. She challenges executives to identify what they are doing right now in their profession that is considered perfectly normal, but that they want to make absolutely absurd in the near future, which is frankly a wild cognitive leap to ask of a group of executives. You know, these are people who are rewarded for stability and predictability. You are essentially forcing them to completely redefine the baseline of reality for their entire profession.
Yeah. But what really caught my eye in the sources, and we have to talk about this, is the timeline they attached to it. Because if you look at the official facilitator guide for the summit, it originally sets the timeline for this Make It Absurd thought experiment at 5 to 10 years out. Which makes sense, right? That's a very standard strategic horizon for corporate planning.
Exactly.
But then when you read Cindy Liu's actual kickoff email to the attendees, she completely scraps that. She pushes the CHRO mastermind members to identify what they want to make absurd in the next 1 to 3 years. Yeah, that's a huge pivot. Okay, let's unpack this. Why the rush? Because 1 to 3 years isn't some distant sci-fi vision of the future. That is literally the very next planning cycle. Well, that shortened timeline tells us everything about the intense pressure these leaders are feeling right now. The sheer speed of technological change, specifically the rollout of artificial intelligence, it just isn't allowing for a comfortable 10-year runway anymore. The window to adapt is closing so fast, incredibly fast.
And if you look at the recurring themes in the transcripts from this summit, the biggest target on their back, like their ultimate smoking in the hospital practice, is the traditional perception of HR as a reactive administrative support function, right? They want it to be considered absurd that talent strategy is ever separated from business strategy. They basically want to eradicate this idea that HR only gets called into the room to clean up the mess after the big financial decisions are already made, right?
And to prove that point, the leaders in this mastermind group targeted the biggest strategic blind spot in business right now, which is mergers and acquisitions. Mergers and acquisitions.
Yeah.
M&A is the ultimate stress test of a company's strategic vision, isn't it? It is where billions of dollars are either won or lost. And usually, it's lost. One of the executives in the room dropped a data point that is frankly terrifying if you are an investor. 80% of M&A deals fail. Wait, 80%? Yeah, 8 out of 10 deals do not achieve their intended value. That is just a staggering failure rate.
Wow.
And the sources show the leaders dissecting exactly why that failure rate is so incredibly high. Because on paper, the math usually makes perfect sense. Oh yeah, the projected run rates, which is essentially just forecasting future revenue based on current performance, and the earnings per share. All of that financial due diligence is incredibly rigorous. The CFOs and the lawyers scrutinize every single penny, but the human due diligence, it is practically non-existent. To explain this, one of the mastermind members used this incredible historical analogy in their share-out. They compared merging corporate cultures to smashing Sparta and Athens together.
It is the perfect way to visualize the friction. I mean, let's break down the mechanics of what actually happens when you combine two radically different environments. Let's say the acquiring company is Sparta. It rewards ruthless individual efficiency. It's cutthroat, and people are driven by massive individual financial bonuses, right? And the company they are buying is Athens, and they reward collaborative, slow-burn, team-oriented output. They celebrate group wins. Currently, the normal practice is that the business development team signs the deal to merge them. Then, at the absolute very last second, HR is thrown the keys with a mandate to go onboard all these new people onto a unified system. And obviously, that unified system usually defaults to whatever the acquiring Sparta company uses. Exactly. So you suddenly take the absolute top performers in Athens and you force them into a Sparta compensation structure that literally penalizes their collaborative workflow. The mechanics of the new system just destroy what made them valuable in the first place. The Spartans immediately feel robbed because their bonus pool is diluted by the new rivals. The Athenians feel threatened and deeply undervalued. And well, your top talent just walks out the door before the ink on the merger is even dry. It's a disaster. Business development essentially throws these completely incompatible structures over the fence. The integration fails, and then, ironically, HR gets blamed for a culture clash they had absolutely no power to prevent.
They are blamed for the fallout of a decision they were completely locked out of. And look, even if you aren't in HR, if your company merges, this is exactly why your top talent might flee next month. So how do they legally and structurally force their way into those early stages? Well, someone at the workshop proposed a highly tactical solution. They said HR needs to hold the software contract for the company's M&A data room. And just for context for you, so listening, the data room is that highly secure digital vault where all the confidential documents, financials, and intellectual property are shared during the earliest, quietest due diligence phases of a potential acquisition.
Okay, hold on. I have to push back on this a bit. Yeah, because grabbing an IT vendor contract for a digital file room sounds like, I don't know, it sounds like you're volunteering for the IT help desk. It sounds like adding administrative work, which seems like the exact opposite of a high-level strategic play. I get that. If I'm the VP of business development, why do I even care who owns the software? I'll just expense my own secure server. Well, you can't because of enterprise security and compliance. At any major company, you cannot just spin up a secure vault with highly sensitive corporate data on a company credit card. It has to go through an approved vendor. Oh, I see. And if HR owns that approved vendor relationship, it acts as a brilliant Trojan horse strategy because they have to come through you to get the keys. Precisely. It functions as a strategic toll booth. Think about the causality here. Business development finds a target company and they need to start reviewing financials. They need a data room. Because HR owns that contract, business development cannot spin up that room without coming to HR first. Right? It forces an early intervention. It does. They ask for access and HR gets to stop them and say, okay, who are we looking at? What is the strategic goal here? What does their org chart look like? It gives HR visibility before a single financial decision is made.
Okay, I see how that forces the door open, but getting into the room is only half the battle. Another leader at the summit emphasized that once you use these backdoor tactics to get a seat at the strategy table, you cannot sit there talking about feelings and morale. No, absolutely not. The CFO is looking at spreadsheets, and if you come in with a vibe check, you are getting ignored. Right, you have to speak the language of the CFO to tie talent directly to revenue growth and risk mitigation. The members noted that you must use AI and hard data to make your case. You have to explain how the human element actually impacts the bottom line. The specific example in the sources lays this out perfectly. You can't just tell the CFO that Sparta and Athens are going to clash and people will be sad.
Yeah.
You have to use your data to predict that forcing a new compensation model will result in, say, a 20% turnover of high-performing engineers. You then calculate that this turnover will delay the new product launch by 6 months, and that delay will cost the company $50 million in projected revenue. Exactly. You put a $50 million price tag on the culture clash. That is how you stay in the strategy room.
So if HR successfully secures that early seat at the table, what massive initiative do they actually drive once they are there? Because the transcripts point to the biggest corporate power vacuum today, which is the control of artificial intelligence. Oh yeah, the introduction of generative AI has caused a massive structural shakeup, and every company is fiercely debating who should own it. And the participants at Cindy Lou's summit came out swinging on this topic. They declared that it is absolutely absurd that IT is currently leading AI initiatives in so many companies.
What's fascinating here is that they're pointing out a very common corporate reflex. We default to IT for AI simply because it involves software, servers, and networks. But treating AI as just another IT software rollout fundamentally misunderstands what the technology actually is. They used this great analogy in the summit. They said letting IT lead AI is like letting the mechanic dictate your family road trip destination just because they understand how the engine works. That's so good. Yes, they can check the oil, but they don't know the needs of the passengers or the ultimate destination.
It's a great analogy because it highlights the disconnect between what the leaders called the expert mentality and behavioral reality. IT professionals build infrastructure based on rigid process flows and strict access controls, but AI fundamentally alters daily human behavior. Right? If you apply a rigid top-down deployment strategy to a behavioral tool, it just fails. It makes me think of buying a top-of-the-line $1,000 iPad for an employee, but it's locked down so tightly that they're only allowed to use the calculator app. Yeah, it completely defeats the purpose.
The sources outline two really dark outcomes if IT or operations leads AI. The first is what they call pilot purgatory, right? Pilot purgatory happens when AI is treated as a shiny object rather than a true workflow solution. So IT buys a license, puts it in a safe sandbox, and gives 50 employees access to it. And people just mess around with it. They write a poem about their dog. They summarize a long email. They say, oh, that's neat, yeah. But because the tool doesn't connect to the CRM, the software where the sales team actually tracks all their client data and revenue, it doesn't solve any real friction points in their daily jobs. They still have to manually log all their calls. Exactly. So after 2 weeks, usage drops to 0, and the tool just dies in purgatory. The underlying mechanics of their job never changed. And the second dark outcome is even worse. Honestly, it's the headcount guillotine. This happens when operations treats AI purely as a blunt instrument for efficiency. They look at a timeline and say, by March, we will have enough automation to cut 20 jobs. Which brings us to why HR needs to take the wheel. By wresting the control of the AI transformation away from IT and operations, HR shifts the entire strategic goal. The objective is no longer just cutting headcount, it is elevating human capability.
You automate the busy work so your existing employees can upskill and take on higher-level revenue-generating tasks. And we really have to explain how that actually works, because it's not just great you save 3 hours on data entry, go home early, right? It's not a vacation. No. HR builds a framework that says now that AI handles your daily admin, your new core competency is relationship management or complex problem solving. Here is the customized training pathway to get you there. Structurally convert time saved into new value created. And this is where Cindy Lou ran a very visceral brainstorming session with the group. She had them write down their current daily tasks on sticky notes and use voting dots to target the bureaucracy they needed to destroy. Looking at the notes from the sources, you can almost feel the collective frustration in the room as these executives realized how much of their job was just noise. They identified some massive absurdities. They really did. They said it should be absurd that HR still does manual workforce planning. It should be absurd that highly paid strategic leaders spend hours formatting slide decks. It should be absurd that HR is considered merely a cost center, and it should be absurd for the CHRO to report to anyone other than the CEO.
It was a complete rejection of the status quo. But there was one sticky note that fundamentally challenged what the HR profession even is. It targeted the absolute sacred cows of the industry, the annual performance appraisal and the annual salary survey. The mastermind members voted that tying HR to an annual calendar of events needs to be made absurd. But here's where it gets really interesting. Let's pause on that for a second because it's crucial. If you strip away the annual review, if you strip away the massive salary survey and all the classroom training seminars, what is HR? Right, that sounds like a total identity crisis. It is an identity crisis, but that crisis is a necessary feature, not a bug. You have to destroy the old identity to make room for the new one. I mean, think about the why behind destroying the annual review. The bureaucratic ritual of a manager sitting down in November and trying to accurately remember what an employee did back in February is incredibly flawed. It is biased, it is backward-looking, and it takes weeks of manual form filling across the entire company. It generates a ton of paperwork, but almost zero behavioral change.
So, what replaces it? How do you actually manage performance without a review? The leaders argued for real-time AI feedback loops. The example given in the sources breaks it down beautifully. Let's say an employee struggles with a specific type of client escalation on a Tuesday. Under the old system, maybe that gets brought up in a tense meeting 6 months later, right? Under the new system, the AI platform flags the skill gap immediately based on the call transcript or the CRM data, and it automatically suggests a customized microlearning module on Wednesday. Oh wow, the heavy administrative lift just vanishes. You don't need HR to organize a generic 3-day classroom seminar on client relations for the whole department. You have pinpoint daily interventions driven by data. The employee gets the help they need exactly when they need it.
Okay, so if HR is no longer the calendar enforcer running annual events, and they aren't organizing giant classroom seminars, they have to abandon their final, most deeply entrenched historical burden. And this brings us to the ultimate absurdity discussed at the summit. Who actually owns company culture?
This is perhaps the biggest paradigm shift of the entire deep dive. Historically, if morale is low, culture gets dumped directly onto HR's desk. They are the ones tasked with organizing the retreat, buying the ping pong tables, and sending out the endless engagement surveys. Yeah, but the most profound sticky note at the summit stated that it would be absurd for the business to believe that HR is solely responsible for company culture, because culture isn't a program you run. It's not a survey you send out on a Friday afternoon. Culture is the aggregate result of how a business operates and makes decisions on a daily basis. Exactly. Culture is what you tolerate and what you reward. Therefore, the true owners of the culture are the business leaders themselves. It's the sales VP who decides which behaviors actually get financially rewarded in the commission structure. If they reward closed deals regardless of how toxic the salesperson was to the rest of the team, that is the culture. The sales VP owns that, not HR. So what does this all mean? If HR isn't the culture police anymore, what are they? Do they just wash their hands of it entirely?
Not at all. According to the framework developed by the CHRO mastermind members, HR shifts from being the police to being the strategic architects. They architect the systems that dictate the culture. Aha! They design the compensation structures, the promotion criteria, and the penalty systems. They build the engine. Exactly. Those systems dictate employee behavior. And that behavior multiplied across hundreds of employees becomes the culture. They are moving away from being the enforcers who remind you to fill out a self-evaluation form, and they are becoming the engineers who build the guardrails for the entire business. They make sure the sales VP's commission structure actually aligns with the company's stated values.
Bringing this all home for you listening today, the vision laid out in these sources from Cindy Lou's summit is incredibly clear. This new, unapologetically strategic powerhouse HR function has absolutely nothing to do with filling out forms faster or ordering better snacks for the break room. No, not at all. It is about leveraging AI to elevate human capability, intercepting M&A deals early to prevent billion-dollar cultural disasters, and engineering the structural systems that drive revenue. And while this deep dive was hyper-focused on human resources, the Make It Absurd framework applies to whatever it is you do for a living. It really does. Look closely at your own daily workflow. What manual reports are you generating every week? What bureaucratic cross-departmental meetings are you sitting through? What are you doing right now that is considered perfectly normal, but that will look utterly ridiculous when technology inevitably shifts the baseline in the next 1 to 3 years? Which leaves you with one final lingering thought to mull over as we wrap up today. Let's say you take this framework to heart. You successfully use AI to automate and delegate all the manual calendar-driven tasks that define your current work week. If you actually succeed in making your current routine absurd, you are going to create a sudden, massive vacuum in your own professional identity. This raises a deeply personal question. Are you actively cultivating the visionary, deeply human skills required to step into the strategic role that replaces your current one? Or by clinging to the comfort of your busy work, are you inadvertently accelerating your own obsolescence? You have to figure out what the doctor's smoking in the hospital practice is in your own career before someone else points it out, and you are the one left holding the ashtray. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.